All right, welcome to take two of social distillation, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain, hopefully with a stable connection this time. So that today we can talk about how America is awesome and every place else sucks. And hopefully we can keep it that way. But right
Yeah.
now it doesn't look like we're going to.
I think we will. And there's a lot of stuff we've talked about in the past about the
Mhm.
difference between how people think from one place to another, going way back, that I think is going to play into it. And there are some things specific to the states that actually make us the best suited to be kind of the stop valve for some of the things that are going on. And we'll go into that in a little more in detail. But for those that have just recently subscribed and started watching, we are not doing a Wheel of Time episode this time. This
Sorry,
is,
nerds.
yeah, this is going to be other stuff. So if you're here just for that, then wait till this weekend. We'll do another one after episode 5.
Mm-hmm.
But today, we're talking about my recent trip to Germany, and then I think we got some NFL stuff at
Yeah,
the end as
hopefully we'll have
well.
time for that.
Yeah. So I just got back from Germany, and it looks like I just got back just in time because it was on kind of a soft lockdown when I was there, where you needed your vaccine passport and negative test to basically do anything. Uh, so for a week, I really couldn't do anything because I've been naturally infected, which they don't recognize in the States. So we have no sort of paperwork for that. And we did take some tests while we were there, but all the clinics that were no appointment needed, well, because they're requiring everybody to test, they're all running out of stuff. So they started being appointment needed, even though the sign said none. And we were just basically stuck walking around outside the whole time. Uh, but now, as of this morning, they're talking about locking down everybody that's unvaccinated. They can't even leave their house for most things. I don't know what the details are yet. I haven't followed up on it, but it's getting even worse.
Mm-hmm. And the justification for it is really disturbing, and you hear it here as well of, well, you should just get the vaccine. Okay, well, that's not the point. The point is we are being literally fascists. Australia, a Western liberal democracy, is building concentration camps. You can call it vaccine quarantine camps or whatever you want, but they're concentration camps. If you don't follow our edicts, you go to this camp, you get put here. And uh, the camps aren't even going to be fully ready for like another year and a half. Does it sound like they think any of these measures that they're doing are actually working? If they're planning that far into the future to have quarantine camps?
Well, let's look at the numbers from those areas. So let's bring up, this is Google News. This is the curve from Germany right here. And this is over the last, let's see, this is beginning of November, end of October, beginning of November. We got this curve started right in the middle of October.
Gee, I wonder what that is. What's the weather like there right now, Sam?
Well, we did everything outside, and it ranged from about 28 degrees Fahrenheit to 34 degrees Fahrenheit, and overcast and slushy rain. This is just, I brought up the WHO numbers just to show that they're consistent with the other ones I brought up. What I do like about the WHO is they do a weekly
Yeah,
versus
yeah.
just the daily, so you can see the pattern. Now, this is incomplete data. That's why that bar is so low right there. Uh, but going up to basically the week they were there, look at the spike going up and compare it to the other spikes of their history with this virus. Same here with the Google data. So so yeah, they do have an extreme spike starting in October, and we've got two things. Like you said, weather patterns. It's
Mm-hmm.
getting cold there, right? Everybody's inside, everybody's sharing the same air. The second one is this is their first real wave of Delta when it got cold. because up in just like the north of the United States right now, where New York, Illinois, Michigan, all of those are starting to explode now. Same with Germany. People don't realize how far north Germany is. Where we were
Yeah.
in Bavaria, which is southern Germany, is equal to the Canadian border
Yeah.
here. So people in the States forget how far north some of this stuff is over in Europe. So for the last, from this nice little dip right here in the summer months, they were enjoying, 80-degree, 70-degree weather, and everybody was outside, and they just, do more outside anyways than we do in the States.
Hmm.
So the weather pattern, the first surge of Delta in conjunction with the weather pattern, and you've got this massive spike. Now, what is the other number I wanted to show? So death did go up as well, not nearly as bad as it was during those smaller spikes, because we got better treatment and everything. So death is not directly correlated to the case number as of what they had, right? And I've got a lot of thoughts on that. First of all, we're getting better treatment, so that's awesome, right? Second of all, you kind of have a culling of a population. So those high
Yeah.
death numbers before
Yeah.
were the more vulnerable people, which sounds horrible to say, but it's just reality.
Yeah. It's a morbid thought, but that was my exact thought of, I've mentioned this before, of when the first wave, when the alpha hit Italy, it was really bad. And that's what scared a lot of people in the
Mhm.
States into locking down, because, China was lying. You couldn't trust China. We didn't know what was going on. But then when it hit Italy, it was so bad. And you had so much visual evidence of it because it was a Western country and you had lots of news reports. But we knew early on who this was hitting, because the numbers out of Italy were something like 90% of deaths were people 80 or older.
Mhm. I think 80% of the deaths were already uh, within life expectancy of a year,
Mm-hmm.
for all causes.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so there is that, and that has to play into it again. Morbid thought, but it's
Yeah.
true. But
And
the
that's
other
something I
thought,
haven't seen, were breakdowns of the age cohorts in comparison. Because yeah, you see these waves, but there's a lot going into these raw numbers that is not being considered or talked about.
well, and so one the third factor that goes into this is uh, testing. Okay, so you see that smaller spike that I've got the cursor on right now, right there when it's starting to get cooler and people are starting to spend more time indoors. Uh, that smaller spike caused a reaction, and that reaction was testing policies. I took more COVID tests over the last 2 weeks than I have over the first 22 months of this whole virus, 21 months of this whole virus. So we've got all of a sudden an inundation to the point they're running out of tests at
Mm.
these clinics of testing. Well, obviously you're going to catch more cases, which some would, I mean, we can banter about whether that's good or bad, but when you just look at the raw numbers, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Mm-hmm.
So we catch more cases, that number goes up. And again, it's not going up in direct correlation with the death number. So we're catching more cases, so we start testing more, catch more cases, start testing more, and you're going to see that case number rise. So all of those three things are playing into it, but the reaction isn't, hey, we're in the colder weather portion of the reaction isn't to those three things. The reaction is, oh, must be the unvaccinated, lock them up,
Mm-hmm.
get more vaccines. But now we got to look at another layer of this. Look at their spike. Look how it's going in conjunction to everything else. This is pre-vaccine right here.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So all of this going up now, vaccination rate 68.7%.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So 68.7% of their population is vaccinated. And we see this spike coming up now. When we go to the United States, we are not seeing the same pattern. In cases, we just kind of keep going in this nice little wave. Whoop, there it goes. And I've got a beef with these numbers right here. So follow the line don't follow the spikes.
Yeah.
Follow the trend line, and you'll see we're actually lower. They're trying to pull a sneaky on you with the data, but we see this leveling kind of pattern with the U.S. when we're almost 10% less vaccinated. So the argument is lock up the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated, or lock up the unvaccinated versus the vaccinated, when there's really no justification for that, because you have to say 100% that the vaccinated can't spread the disease, and you have to say 100% that it is the unvaccinated causing the problem.
Mm.
And the world data does not follow that pattern.
Well, I wouldn't even say 100%. I would say if you had 80 to 90%, those would be solid enough numbers to at least give you justification for what you're trying to do. But I would still say that, again, this isn't even the point to me. For this, it's you either have bodily autonomy or you don't. Right now, there's the Mississippi abortion case is before the Supreme Court. And so the same people that are trying to lock up the vaccinated and mandate vaccines are also the same people who are shouting "my body, my choice" when it comes to abortion. Do you see the contradiction, people? Do you? Well, actually, I guess the more disturbing question, at least in my mind, is, do you even care about the contradiction?
No. Some people, when I talk about my political leanings, how I don't identify with the right or the left. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I'm an independent. A lot of people automatically assume it's because I have no position.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is it's because I can be consistent in my positions. I can be pro-abortion and be anti-mandate for the vaccines at the same time. I don't have to contradict myself in these things. I still have strong stances on the individual issues. It's just neither side, neither leaning has 100% of that stance. In fact, they
you don't have a team jersey. You don't have a team jersey when it comes to political philosophy. You have a political philosophy, and you're going to consider each issue individually, just like you would consider each political candidate individually, because you don't have a team jersey. So it's not R or D versus D for you. That I just had a brain fart of where I was going with that.
Well, while you have your brain fart, I'm gonna kind of just show the little sneaky that that Google is trying to do here, and this is also in conjunction with the data the New York Times presents. But look at the original spike. So this big January spike when COVID was basically at its worst. That's bad. Massive spike, and the area under the curve is full. Right. So we're watching that curve, and it's very highly correlated with the actual daily numbers. But if we look over to more current events, that curve, if you look at the daily numbers, looks like it's the same. But when you look at the trend line, it's actually quite a bit lower than it was last year. And if you look at the holes in between, it's because they're not reporting certain days and then reporting the whole number on a specific day where it spikes up. And so you're seeing this with the news releases is most cases in COVID history today, when in reality there was no reporting for 3 days before that. So divide it by 4. So if you just take I blew it up for everybody. If you look at it on the small, just regular resolution, it looks like we have the same curve as last year. When in reality, we're looking like, I don't know what the difference is here, 160 to daily average. Yeah, 200,000 to about 150 to 160,000. So a 25% reduction. And
yeah.
But again, if you have that on the smaller screen, you're looking at it at face value, it looks like it's the same as last year. So all the headlines, we're surging again, everything's as bad as it ever was, hospitals are overflowing. Well, they're reporting a specific number that needs to be divided by 4 over a
Yeah.
certain amount of days. So that's the little sneaky I wanted to show that they're trying to pull on you here. And that's with the again, New York Times and Google, and we all know where they stand. But if you look at the weekly numbers, we get a little bit better representation of what's happening. Again, there's Germany.
Mhm.
And where's the US? Where are you at? Here we go. United States. Now we get that this looks like the line under that spike curve.
And it's much more noticeable now.
Yeah. So I mean, we both work in fitness. It's just like checking your weight. Don't check your weight every day or twice a day or whatever, because you're going to see fluctuations that go like this. But if you check it weekly, you're going to see a trend line in the direction you want to go. So
Right. Because a pint's a pound the world around. Water is heavy, and your body is going to retain or shed water fairly regularly, and that data is noise. Okay, that data is noise that you have to filter out. It's the same thing here on the Google line. They were filling that graph with noise, and I think purposely, to make it show what they wanted to show. Whereas if what they cared about were the numbers, they would filter out the noise, because that's what you're supposed to do with data if you're using the data to actually try and find objective truth.
So here's the 2 issues. We got the noise right now. That's issue number 1, and that's going to be issue throughout this whole process. But the issue that I want to address today is this idea of blaming the unvaccinated for the spikes and the spread. And that's where we're getting into some muddy water, because this is where I think America kind of sets itself apart, the United States in general, is because we have an ideal here. And it is a specific ideal in our justice system. It's called innocent until proven guilty. And we can unconsciously fall back on that. And right now, the accusation is non-vaccinated or spreading the disease. That's the accusation. Prove it. Don't just tell me, prove it. You have to prove that without a reasonable doubt. And right now, there's so much doubt around everything we've talked about.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, people are falling in lockstep to that statement, just like in the Rittenhouse case, just like in the Chauvin case or OJ Simpson case. Or
the Rittenhouse case is a good example, partly because we haven't really talked about it since the verdict. And the reason we had the philosophical reason for that that burden of proof is because it is incredibly hard to prove a negative. Prove you don't beat your wife. Well, how? I mean, yeah, she can say I don't. I can say I don't. But how do I prove a negative unless I have some sort of incontrovertible video evidence? And that's, to me, that's the scary thing about the Rittenhouse case is there were a number of incredible salacious accusations. Imagine what would have happened if there had not been that videotape and he was already assumed guilty. And you had, so imagine just 10 years ago, where camera phones and GoPros weren't so ubiquitous, and we had a half dozen different video sources proving the negative. That was the only way to do it. If he had to prove his own case, he was screwed. Except you had all of this video evidence. Okay, that's why you're supposed to calm down, take a step back, and not assume guilt, because you can't prove a negative. And I mean, this is scarlet letter crap. This is witch trial.
It's anything
crap.
ideological.
Exactly.
because what we have, what we say in the scientific community, it's falsifiable or not.
Hmm.
It's not even science if it can't be falsified. You don't even call it theory until it's survived for a certain amount of time of rigor trying to falsify it. Uh, Otherwise, it's just a hypothesis, right? And that's the whole point of it, is you're trying to prove the null hypothesis.
Exactly.
And if you can't, then you make your conclusion accordingly. But in this case, the unvaccinated are spreading the disease and making it worse. Prove it.
Hmm.
Prove it. Show me the transmission rates. Show me that, first of all, a vaccinated person doesn't spread the disease. Now that takes us down a road of, well, what's the viral load that takes a vaccinated person to get sick? Is the threshold for that higher than the viral load it takes for a vaccinated person to spread the disease? Because now I can go the whole other direction and say it's probably, and the data is suggesting this, the vaccinated people that are spreading the disease because they can carry it around without being sick. Just like we started in the initial days of this, the asymptomatic and the pre-symptomatic were the spreaders of the disease because they walk around without knowing they have the disease and they spread it.
Hmm.
Sick people stay home.
Hmm.
Sick people stay in the hospital. People that don't know they're sick but have it go around spreading it. Same with any other disease, flu or cold or whatever. I got a stuffy nose and I've got a good immune system. I can spread the cold to everybody around me, right? And so those are the questions we need to answer before we start locking people up in their houses to where they
Yeah.
are
Well,
basically.
those are just the first set of questions, but then you have to prove, and this is what's so infuriating about this appeal to authority fallacy, which is the science. Okay, well, that's not actual science, that's the science.
But
That
Fauci
that's
is
different.
the science. He called
Exactly.
himself the science.
I am the science. I am the law. Anyway, Judge Dredd reference for anyone who watched the new movie. It's great. Um, it, that's just the first step. Then you have to show that your public policy prescription is actually the best way to handle this first step that you have now proved. The burden of proof is on you. Show this. Then you have to explain why your lockdowns would actually work, would actually address this problem. And that's a public policy question. You don't just get to say the science, go to your quarantine camp. Hold on a second. You haven't even shown that these lockdowns actually work. You haven't shown that this is the best way to address this.
And it's
And
not even a matter of total numbers either. Because of course, if everybody stays home, numbers are going to go down. That but in proportion to contacts, that's what we need to know. So it is, again, I talked about self-fulfilling prophecy with the tests, but if everybody stays home and doesn't get around anybody else, obviously pathogens are going to be spread less. But did it stop it, and did it create a situation where we have a new spike? What's the future impact of that? Did it actually stop it? No, we know that because we're still dealing with it 20 some odd months later, right? And when you look at the numbers in schools, some of the spikes we're seeing in some of these other states are the fact that this is their first year back in school. Whereas here in Texas and some other places, we've been in school for 2 years through this. And the number of kids being infected or spreading the disease is really proportional to how long they've been in school. Have they been exposed to this pathogen a year ago, or are they just now being exposed to it now? So the kids that were in school a year ago have already developed some immunity. And again, culling, the ones that would get sick already got sick. The ones getting sick this year are the ones that took last year off.
Something else I want to bring up here before I get to my final point is something we are terrible at as a species, and is especially egregious when it comes to public policy, is the seen versus the unseen. And the great example of this is 250 years old from a Frenchman of all, I think it was Bastiat. anyway, the broken window fallacy. Okay. Well, if you want to stimulate the economy, just, throw a brick through a baker's window. See, because you've just employed someone to go fix that window.
Mhm.
Okay. But what could the baker have done with that money if you hadn't thrown a brick through his window? So where am I going with this? The NFL is one of the most dogmatically rigid when it comes to their COVID policies. And yet they are also running cancer screening commercials during their games, talking about how one of the casualties of the lockdown was the fact that people didn't get early screenings that they could have gotten or might have gotten that could have stopped cancer before it spread to a point where it was deadly. It's everyone knows that it's easier to treat the sooner you catch cancer.
Mhm.
That is an unseen effect of the lockdown. So you can say,
Which
well,
is
we
the
have
case
to,
for all disease.
which is the case for all disease. So you can say, well, we have to lock down because look at what happens with these COVID numbers when we lock down. Okay, what about everything else? What about all the other effects of locking down? All you're doing is just looking at this one number. What about all those cancer screenings that don't get done? What about, the
Child suicide
socialization?
rates.
What
What
about the
about
child suicide rates?
alcoholism? What about drug overdose? What about
The
insert? Yeah.
economic numbers, et
Yes.
cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We are so fixated on one thing and 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 become so dogmatic, become so cult-like in shouting about that one thing that we never take the step back and look at the unseen. But that's not even the point, because my main point is this. One of the infuriating things about these rigid lockdown proposals is when you hear people like Fauci or the Pfizer CEO. Fun fact, the Pfizer CEO is not an MD. He is a DVM. People who are talking about horse paste, let that roll around in your head. Or former Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, screw your freedom. Screw you, Arnold. Man, you were a disappointment in so many ways. Um, no, your freedom is the point. Your personal liberty is the point. Because if you go down this road of the science and sacrificing your personal autonomy for public safety, where does it stop? I've used this analogy before. If you
Which actually
really,
pulls me to the point I wanted to go with
Mhm.
with the slippery slope
Yep.
fallacy of argument, because the accusation you're going to get with your argument right now
Mhm.
is this is the slippery slope fallacy.
Mhm.
You're looking at the bottom of the slope and the top of the slope and putting them all together, and which is a fallacy of argument.
Mhm.
But there is a way to overcome that fallacy if you can identify the steps on the way down the slope. All right. So I made a little visual that we can work on as we go, and it's overcoming the slippery slope. And here we are at the top of the slope, which is I put it as othering. When we started saying anti-vaxxer versus vaxxer, that's the top of the slope. And all the way down at the bottom is death camps.
Nazis.
Nazis. All right. So all the way down at the bottom is death camps. And this is where the right goes wrong, is they start at the top and go right to the bottom.
Mhm.
So all of this lockdowns, well, it's gulags next. Well, there's a process that's got to happen to go through this. And overcoming the fallacy of the argument is identifying the steps in the process that could lead to it.
Yes.
And then as they happen, you can be like, oh crap, here we go. We're going down. So I was talking with somebody. I'm not going to say who it was, mother-in-law, while we were there, and an otherwise reasonable, good person made a statement that bothered me a lot. And I kept my mouth shut because I was a guest in someone else's house in someone else's country. But she made this, we were talking about the Christmas markets. And these are people who make their living in one special event a year. They
Mhm.
set up their booths, all the crafting they've done all year long goes into this big event. And
It's
they
their
make
black. It's their Black Friday. This
it's
is
their
what gets
black,
them in the
yeah. And
black financially.
this month worth of festivities is where they make their primary income.
And they're
And
awesome. I miss the Christmas festivals. They're a great thing
mhm.
about Germany. They're lots of fun.
Well, of course, they were all in the process of setting up
Mhm.
when we got to, oops, oh, we're not on Germany anymore. Never mind. Okay, forget I shared screen there. I'd have to bring it back to Germany. But when we got that spike, all right.
Mhm.
And so they basically just canceled the Christmas market. They were all tearing it all down while we were there because we walked around outside at Nuremberg and in Bamberg and taking it all down, basically no income. All that work all year, all that setup, which costs money, renting your
Mhm.
spot and everything costs money, and then tear it all down without any business. And the person I was talking to made the comment, you know who should pay for this? The people who refuse to get vaccinated. That was her statement. That's
Mhm.
who should pay for this. Now we've reached the step 2. So we started with othering. We're already talking about vax, anti-vax. Now we're sliding down the slope. Statement about paying. All right. So people starting to support this idea that this other group of people should pay for the damages done. And again, here in the US, we have innocent until proven guilty. You've got to prove that these people are doing this to even make that statement.
Mhm.
Because if it's the other way around or even a null hypothesis, you have no justification for making them pay. Okay, so now what's the next step in that slope? Because say you go with this, where do we go further down the slope? And again, we can incrementalize this.
It's a good question. I'm trying to think of real world example. I don't know if you have one or if,
First, refusal. What do you do with that person that says, I'm not going to pay?
yeah. Yep.
I'm innocent. I didn't do this. I'm not paying your tax.
You're gonna have to forcibly confiscate.
Yep. So now you're going to have to use force on this person. So do you stand
Mhm.
by while they force this person to do it? They send them to jail.
Well, yeah, they're the others.
Mm-hmm. And so now we go down further. What extent do you allow them? So you put them in jail? Do you beat them? Do you make an example out of them? What's the penalty for it? Is it
Oh no,
is it a
we're
fine?
we're
It,
civilized now, and everything's electronic, so you can just electronically raid their bank account.
so it's probably going to be a fine first, right?
Mhm.
They're going to get a fine, which in essence becomes that tax. If you really think about it, now we're going to fine them out of paying for everything else. Uh, but then the first person to refuse the fine, I'm not paying.
Yeah.
Now they've got a warrant, right, for their arrest. So now we're arresting them. And so we've got this whole group of people. Now the next step is multiple people. Everybody
Mhm.
rallies around that person.
Yeah.
So now we're taking the steps down to that bottom of the slope. Uh, and we're seeing it in some places, people being beaten for protesting, people being thrown, like you said, the camps in Australia. So some of this is already happening. And that's how you overcome the slippery slope fallacy. You just name the next step.
Yeah.
Where is your point? This happened in the civil rights movement. This is why it was successful, because it reached a point where the majority of the population said, no, that's too far.
Yeah.
But had you just stayed in the two extremes, most of the country would have been like, well, it's never going to be there, so I'm not going to do anything.
Yeah.
And it's not this anymore, so I'm not going to do anything.
Yep. This is why we here in America supposedly take personal liberty, personal autonomy so seriously, is because if you start with that first principle, that should keep you from going down those steps in the first place. Because once you start sliding down the slope, it's really hard to stop because history shows as you start to go down the slope. I mean, that's why you have it as a parabolic curve, because it gets steeper the farther
Mm-hmm.
down you go. You start to accelerate towards the death camps the closer you get to them. And there are innumerable points in history that show you that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well,
the
when we talk conformity and authoritarianism from a neurological standpoint, from a neurobiology standpoint, that incremental increase is essential for the internal justification. It changes your brain.
Mm.
And the more people that go along with it, the more unlikely you are to go against the grain. So, say one person does an action 3 times, you're less likely to imitate. But if 3 people do an action 1 time, it is more likely for the 4th person to imitate that action. So the incremental slide goes down and say, okay, we want to boycott this business because climate change, right? We want to protest outside of this business so other people don't buy from this business because climate change. This business is already going down the tube. That first person that goes in and loots it, nobody's buying it anyways, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then we start destroying property, and then down it's incremental change towards a certain bottom of the slope. And it's kind of a powerful thing, especially when the mob, that's why I got Madness of Crowds turned around there. When the mob goes in this increment, it is harder and harder and harder and harder for the individual to go against it. Whereas when we come to the United States, we have a very individualistic mentality, but it can still be swept up in the mob.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we're still human. We still have that part of our lizard brain
Mm-hmm.
that wants to get sucked into the group. Because there's a reason fish prey fish school. There's safety in numbers. So there's a part of our brain that always wants that.
Well, and this is how powerful it is. And so this has actually been studied pretty extensively in neuroscience. If you have, so that what they would do is they give somebody a card with a line drawn in it, and then another group of cards that have different length lines on it, and they have to match it to the original one, just eyeballing it and match it. And they would make it to where it's obvious which one was the right one. But what they would do is, if they had just random people all or just asking people with nobody else in the room, they would basically always get it right. But if they had a group of 7 people in the room, and the first 6 were actually researchers, and they would on purpose name the wrong line, the 7th person that was the actual person being studied would go along with the group versus their actual
Mm-hmm.
assessment of which one it was. And the magic number was 3. If 3 in a row said the same thing, the 4th one almost always said that thing that they knew was wrong.
Which is why appeals to public safety can be so dangerous. And it's why they're so often used to implement authoritarian programs, because people want to be safe. Okay. But to what extent will you take this? Okay. So if you can lock people down for not getting a vaccine, then why don't we implement a national 30-mile-an-hour speed limit? Car fatalities are one of the high consistently, not in the last couple of years because people aren't going out as much, but they are consistently one of the highest causes of death and injury in the United States. Okay. So your personal freedom to get to work, no, screw your freedom. For the good of the public, you can't drive faster than 30 miles an hour. Okay, well, but that means I can't get to my job where I live. Well, you're going to have to move for the public good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I don't want to get the vaccine because I don't want to, for whatever reason. Okay. Well, then you're going to have to get another job.
I think we can keep it simple, because we run the risk of doing a false dichotomy too. But I think if we can keep with that theme of innocent until proven guilty, one of the answers to a lot of these things that are taken at face value from a public health or a social program or anything standpoint is, when you hear a statement made that is an accusation, The answer should be prove it. What is your evidence behind that statement? So when someone says the unvaccinated are spreading the disease, how? Give me the numbers. Show me that the viral load is greater in an unvaccinated person before they get too sick to go out than the other way around. Prove it. I'm kneeling because of social justice, because of systemic racism. Systemic racism is the accusation, right?
Mhm.
Prove it. That should have been the answer to Cap in the beginning.
Yeah.
Prove it. Not, oh, you're disrespecting the flag, or oh, you hate veterans, or whatever. It should have been this thing you talk about. Define it, and then show me evidence that it exists, and I'll back you up.
Mhm.
And he never supplied that. And that's the big argument. He can't. I mean, obviously he can't. So the same thing with this whole vaccine issue. Prove to me that this is actually the solution to our problem. Because so far we're a year into vaccination almost, right? Because it was January of last year.
Mhm.
Yeah, so we're almost a year into it, and we have the same trend lines in case rates. Prove it. All the evidence suggests that natural infection is the best.
Mhm.
Vaccines help with your own outcomes, and nothing is changing the spread. So
This is where I am so cynical, and I feel like I don't even have to look at the numbers because the numbers aren't the point. And here's what I mean. So people who are already vaccinated are blaming the trend lines on blaming the spiking cases on the unvaccinated and demanding everyone get vaccinated. Well, why do I have to get vaccinated if you're already vaccinated? Well, because you can still spread it, or you can still get it. Well, I'm willing to take that risk. That's my personal choice, my body, my choice. I'm willing to take that risk because I'm young and healthy, or I just don't care, whatever it is. Well, you can still spread it. Okay, well, if the vaccine works, then what do you care? Because you're protected.
so
And if
the only legitimate argument I've gotten for that was before the kids could get vaccinated. I've
Mhm.
had parents say, because I'm not allowed to vaccinate my kid and you can give it to my kid. So yeah, I'm not worried about me, but you could give it to my kid. And so that was the argument coming out of that, which was slightly legit, except for the fact that the kid numbers are so low and they're probably the ones spreading it to us. But just like when you send
right,
your kid to daycare, everybody in the house gets the cold all of a sudden.
right.
But
But if you are that concerned, then wear a mask. Not only wear a mask, wear a good mask. Because at the very beginning, again, one of the reasons that I don't trust these people is because they've lied from the beginning. Let me take you in the way back machine to the very beginning of this in early 2020, even late 2019, where Dr. Fauci said masks don't stop this kind of virus. The public doesn't need to worry about it. And he later admitted, yeah, I was lying about that because I was concerned about our N95 stocks, are the good ones, the ones that we know stop this kinds of transmission. I was worried about our stocks of that, and I wanted to make sure all of our healthcare workers had enough.
the noble lie.
The noble lie. Okay. All right. So if we set aside the noble lie and just ignore that part for the moment and just focus on not only masks, they work, and the good ones especially work. So if you're really concerned, you can go get a vaccine, you can go get as many boosters as you want, and we no longer have a quality mask shortage. Hell, Home Depot has boxes upon boxes of N95 masks. And if you don't like your breath hanging right there, if you don't want your glasses to fog up, you can get the kind with the ventilator. They have plenty of those. Oh, but then I'm exhaling I don't care. I've already proven by the fact that I'm walking around without a mask that I don't care. Ventilate your breath all you want. So again, you can protect yourself very well. So why are you trying to force me to do what you want? Just do it. Do it yourself. it makes me wonder, is this really about what you say it's about, or is it about controlling people's choices and lives?
Let me go grab something because I have one more thought to close my part of it out.
Okay. I should probably vamp here, but I really don't have a. You should go watch the Reason magazine. They did a video called "You Want People to Die." Just search "Reason You Want People to Die." It's hilarious.
I almost forgot this was part of my thing today. This is an article in JAMA, and if only we could test where we're at as far as this disease with a certain 20-minute or 10-minute test that we can all see where we are as far as our immunity goes. There was apparently wasn't an answer to my statement on that in JAMA, the flawed science of antibody testing. As you read this article, I encourage people to go ahead and read it because it's ridiculous. You go through and they talk about how good the antibody tests are, but how they're not a good indicator of immunity because you should still get vaccinated. Ridiculous statement of the year right here. The SARS-CoV-2 serology tests, the antibody tests that eventually receive FDA emergency use authorization have demonstrated high sensitivity and specificity. Great, awesome, they're good tests, right? But that accuracy is only for detecting antibodies. Their ability to predict protection against the virus based on those antibodies hasn't been proven. Ridiculous statement of the year right there. So what I want to know is, where is this immunity test that you have? Where is this test that you're going to say is actually better? It's a play on words here. It's kind of double speak through their mouth. Yeah, it's good at detecting antibodies, but that doesn't show how protected you are. Antibodies are an indicator of protection. This test tests for antibodies. It does not test for direct immunity. There is no test for direct immunity. There is no direct immunity. Even a vaccination only gives you a better chance of surviving the barrage of virus. Your level of antibodies gives you a better chance of surviving the barrage of antibodies. So if you want to come to me with this isn't perfect, so don't go by it on everything, then I'm going to say the same thing about your damn vaccine.
Yeah.
I'm going to say the same thing about any treatment you bring forward.
Yeah.
I'm going to say the same thing about a freaking seatbelt. All right. So this article is propaganda 101. Yes, this works for testing this, which is an indicator of this, but you can't really tell 100% that you'll be protected based on this test. Now, they take it a step further. The FDA cautioned that some tests detect antibodies the immune system likely produces only after a natural infection with the virus. Depending on the assay, people weren't previously infected could test negative for antibodies despite having the vaccine-induced immunity. So someone like me reads that as maybe that's because natural immunity provides more protections than the vaccine-induced immunity. Because you basically, to show you have antibodies, would have to do it in a spike protein specific test to show that you have immunity antibodies from the vaccine, versus if you have some other aspect of the virus in the test, it's only going to show up if you have the immunity for that, which you don't with the spike protein vaccine. So they're using that statement that you can test negative for antibodies with the vaccine from an antibody test to say, well, that's why we recommend that you don't use these to evaluate a person's immunity.
That's a lot of word salad.
That was the term I used when the doctor I was talking to brought this article to me. So this is what we call word salad in research. and yeah, that's, take that as you will. Read the damn article if you want to.
Well, I actually have a transition with that to what I wanted to talk about in football. And here's why.
American football.
You have
not
talked,
foosball.
dang, Skippy. You have talked before about game theory,
Mm-hmm.
and because of people's propensity to game any system, rules need to be as simple and clear and direct as possible,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because otherwise you get word salad and people can, game the system and try and confuse you. One of the infuriating rules that has driven us crazy for years is pass interference. And it's been more about the interpretation of the rule and the application of the rule. It hasn't been particularly clear. And it has really neutered defenses, and we both like defense. And now I thought from the officiating I've seen this year, I thought it had gotten better because it seemed like one, they were doing a better job of calling offensive pass interference instead of just in the past. It seemed like if there was contact, the defender was getting a flag. If they were doing a better job of no, the offender initiated that contact, so that's offensive pass interference. The other thing that it seemed like is that they were letting them play. So hand fighting was no longer pass interference.
Mm-hmm.
So long as you didn't obviously impede or redirect, which is the wording, impede or redirect the receiver, it wasn't pass interference. If it was just mutual hand fighting, hand touching, no pass interference. They also weren't automatically throwing a flag if you didn't turn around, which was something that has driven me crazy for years.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so
because we were taught to play the hands a
yeah,
lot of the
so
time.
what if I
Yeah.
don't turn around, if I'm just throwing my hands up trying to knock the ball away and I'm not impeding or redirecting?
Mm-hmm.
What does it matter if I don't turn around? Okay. And then the Cowboys played the Raiders. And I always say, don't blame the refs because there's always something you could have done. There are always other factors. This is the one time I can remember where I said, no, blame the refs because they threw 14 flags. Now, granted, they threw 14 flags on both sides, but in the first half, the Cowboys couldn't get anything going because their drives kept ending in penalties, or the Raiders were allowed to score through dubious penalties. And a lot of them were these, hold on, to me, that just looks like hand fighting. Hold on, he didn't turn around, but he didn't impede or redirect the receiver, or he didn't turn around, but the receiver initiated contact trying to go back through him.
Mm-hmm.
So how is this pass interference? And there were some holding calls that even the booth was like, what?
Yeah.
So same thing. And can I share screen?
I think I made it to where you could.
Yeah. All right. I'm just going to play this in real time. This is what ended the game. So the Cowboys had gotten the Raiders at a 3rd and 18 in overtime. They're out of field goal range. They just need a stop here. They get the ball back and they have a chance to win it in overtime with a field goal. Let this run. Sam, what did you see there? I know it was pretty fast, but
Can you go back and do it one more time? It was real stuttery coming through here.
here's the pass.
I saw nothing.
Did you see anything odd there? Oh, but it gets
Now,
worse.
Did he have his left hand on his arm?
Oh, it gets worse. All right, so let me share a still of that pass. Anything look odd to you there?
Show me the video again. Because that's after the ball already bounced away, right?
Get me to the replay. Let's see if you're gonna. Yep. Here's the replay. So that's just hand fighting, hand fighting, hand fighting. How is the receiver or the defender supposed to turn around when the receiver has grabbed him by the helmet? This is the one that has driven me the most crazy because the idiot local talk people have been complaining about this one as the most obvious one. And I'm looking at it going, this is the most obvious, not his fault. Because this is Brown got 4 pass interference calls, and only one of them, to my mind, was obvious. He was obviously impeding or redirecting. And that one, I don't know where the ball was. That one could have and maybe should have been a holding penalty anyway, and not a pass interference penalty. The receiver is grabbing him by the helmet and pulling him in. He's not making contact. He's got his hands to the side.
Mm-hmm.
How the hell is this defensive pass interference? And again, it's more egregious here. And it happened in the OSU OU game too. It happened twice. And that one I won't blame on the refs because they had a lot of bad calls on both sides. But there were two in particular that were like this.
I hate to blame the refs because a still shot or a slow-mo replay is a lot different than watching from the field 10 yards away, especially if it was at an angle where you couldn't see the receiver's hands. You could just see the defender going into him. But that is a good argument for why penalties should be replayable, because refs do make mistakes. And in fact, refs make more mistakes than they'd like to admit.
Well, and because
on penalties
of that,
than they do on a fumble or a spot of the ball or whatever. They're actually more accurate on that than they are in the penalties. But yet we replay the things that they're more accurate on for the sake of actual accuracy in the game. But we won't replay a penalty because their word is God at that point.
Well, remember, they tried to do that because of that New Orleans, Minnesota playoff game where it was so egregious that they said, and it cost New Orleans a playoff win.
That one
and
wasn't even close, though.
I thought this one was egregious in real time, but it definitely is in replay, and it cost them the game. This set them up for a chip shot field goal that won it in overtime. Well, they tried this for a year and said, okay, this isn't working and it's crappy. And rather than refining it so that it made more sense, they just did away with it. Why? We do that a lot in our society. Hold on. Okay, this isn't working. Why? Can we simplify it? Can we make it simple and clear and more direct, and thus make it work before we just get rid of it?
I've got a good example of that. Defund police. Not improve, not do anything to make it better, but scrap the whole thing.
I have a better example
What's that?
I wasn't going to bring up because I didn't want to get too political, but the Waukesha massacre, Christmas parade massacre. This guy should have been locked away, and people have been complaining a lot recently about the 3 strikes rule. And there are some valid criticisms to it, but people have forgotten, because we have short memories or because a lot of this is coming from youngsters. People have forgotten how high crime was, especially in urban areas, in the 70s and into the 80s. This is where the 3 strikes rule came from. Now, you can argue that it was kind of dumb because the 90s crime bill came about when crime was already going down. But the logic of the 3 strikes rule is that recidivism rates are very high, very high. Most crime is committed by people who have already committed a crime. Recidivism rates are very high. And if you have harmed society a number of times, we're not just going to keep letting you out to do that. This guy who drove through these people in his Christmas parade in Waukesha had a 50-page rap sheet. So rather than saying, hold on, here are some examples of people who have really gotten screwed by the 3 strikes rule. So rather than saying, okay, we need to refine this so the people that are locked up are, let's say, violent offenders. The 3 strikes rule only applies to violent crimes, if that's what we want to go with. And I think a lot of people could get behind that and say, yeah, if you're if you're boosting stereos and you get caught 3 times, you shouldn't be locked up for life for that. I think a lot of
Mhm.
people would agree to that. And those are the kinds of things that were used to justify getting rid of the 3 strikes rule.
Well, it was
Okay.
it was the overlap of the three stripe rule with the flawed war on drugs,
Mm-hmm.
where
Mm-hmm.
they basically go after the users and the
Mm-hmm.
small time dealers versus the actual problem. And so
Yeah.
you got a guy in marijuana possession, and then shoplifting, and he's in jail for 20 years because it was the third strike, even though there
Mm-hmm.
were very minor things. Uh, but like you said, violent crime. Yeah, this guy, what did he do? He ran over a chick. What was his first one?
Well, the one that stands out the most to me of how the hell was he even out of prison? Uh, Underage sex, and what do they
Yeah,
call it? They call it. It had a weird name that made me go, "What the hell?" It was like corruption of a minor, and I don't remember. He was pimping out a 15-year-old.
mm-hmm.
He was having sex with and pimping out a 15-year-old. He's on video admitting this and kind of bragging about it and complaining that, hey, she didn't have a problem with it until she had a problem with it. And then all of a sudden she complains and, oh, look at me, I'm a sex offender. Yeah, you are a sex offender, you dirty creep.
Mm-hmm.
He's on
You know, maybe
video.
maybe in that time she was with you, she grew up a little bit and realized this was wrong.
Yeah.
That's why the law exists, because they're too young to make that decision when they're that
the the
young.
the other one that jumps out at me is that he ran over his baby mama with this
Mm-hmm.
same car that he used to drive over these people in the Christmas parade. And he's out on bail. He's out
Thousand
on bail when one of his crimes was he was arrested for bail jumping. You posted that, the meme of Kyle Rittenhouse has a $2 million bail, and the Las Vegas Raider who killed someone because he was driving 150 miles an hour while just stone drunk got, what was it, 150,000
150,000. Yeah,
$150,000 in bail. White privilege. This guy got like $1,000 bail
it was
for
500
one.
for the first offense, 1,000 for the second, and then he committed this crime.
He got $1,000 bail, even though he had been arrested previously for bail jumping.
Cherry pick your data though.
Yeah, yeah. Let's maybe make rules clear and direct and
Not only
logical,
that, but
or we could just throw everything out.
not only that, but he was ranting about things that we've talked about that may contribute to somebody's propensity to violence, as if maybe that was what led him to his conclusion of what he
Mm-hmm.
should do. But that's also being thrown to the side. So,
Well,
if only there was this ideology that causes people to want to be violent. I don't know.
well, I think it's kind of worse than that, because when we were texting about this, my concern was, or my thought was, I don't even know that he did it on purpose. There's a lot of people on the right, especially, claiming he's a black nationalist terrorist who committed domestic terrorism by running these people over. I don't know that he was perfectly trying to go out and run over and kill a bunch of white people. I think it's worse that he didn't care, that we have othered each other so much that he was trying to flee another crime. He made a turn into this Christmas parade full of grannies and kids, and he had so much contempt and so little thought for people that he no longer saw as human, that had been othered so much, that he was willing to run a vehicle through this crowd to get away.
I think you're giving him too much of a benefit of the doubt there, because there's so much about his path
Mm-hmm.
that running from a knife fight just doesn't add up. Especially if you're already in the car and driving away, a knife is not a big threat anymore. But I don't know. We have to speculate about
Yeah.
motive, which I don't care to do too often. The fact is, he did what he did, and
Yeah.
he didn't do anything to stop himself from doing it. So this is a little bit more clear cut, even if you don't go down that route. I hate to. I don't think domestic terrorist was the right thing too. So that's where the right's going wrong. He
Yeah.
was just a bad dude that didn't
Very
care.
bad. Yeah.
Yeah. We got to close it out here.
Yep. Now that I've depressed myself after trying to talk about football to have something lighthearted to rant about.
Yeah. Well, I guess the moral of the story is, well, no. Here's my takeaway, because so much in science, we can look back at things that were not really ethical when it comes to research, especially in behavioral science.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh, and we kind of piggyback on it to this day. And we would never repeat those same experiments, but they happened. And we know
Yeah.
a lot because of them.
Yeah.
And I can't change what's going on in Austria right now, or Australia, or in Germany. But what we can do now is keep track of the numbers. We can keep track of what's going on, because they're going to do what they're doing. Those elected officials are already elected. They're already in power. People are already following along with it. And now, from our perspective in the States, with our kids, our family, everything, let's take advantage of the fact that they're doing it already, and show the world that it's not going to work,
Mm-hmm.
and it didn't work, and here's the path you go down. So we can't change that they're doing it, but we can change how we do it.
Yeah.
And hopefully that leaks back the other way at some point, for those people's sake. But
Hopefully. All
hopefully.
right. Well, I don't have any hope that that'll happen. But in the meantime, we'll be back to record on the weekend after watching episode
Episode
5 of Wheel
5.
of Time for something hopefully more lighthearted, but it'll probably suck. So
All right, I'll talk to you later.
later.